I'm trying to think. I think it used MPEG-1 compression. I think it was the original MPEG compression. Because I remember we had full movies on CDI format.
It was like 4 discs or something, right?
No, it wasn't that bad. It was usually 2 discs per, but I'm pretty sure it was SVCD quality, which I'm pretty sure was MPEG.
I know you had 4 weddings and a funeral on there.
I had 4 weddings and a funeral. That's
Here
right.
you go. MPEG-1 decoding.
There you go.
Initially priced around $1,000 US, which
That's in 1990.
in 1990, yeah,
And
1991 it says.
But what I want to mention is the 30-minute infomercial that you saw is not for the Philips CDI. It's for the Magnavox CDI, which came along much later because that was when they started. Magnavox comes out with a version that is really built to be a gaming console, which is totally different than the multimedia gigaplex that the Philips CDI was supposed to
And
be.
everyone has just learned way more of the CDI than they ever really cared to.
We'll podcast on the big losers someday for sure. But for now, all you need to know is that the old Commodore had himself a CDI and loved it. Well, not really. I had a kind of a love-hate relationship with my CDI. Okay, so those are our combatants, folks, and I think in terms of sales and in terms of pretty much every other category, again, there's not much of a debate here. The big winner is the Super Nintendo Entertainment System.
Although very tight in North America, I don't remember the exact numbers, but
I happen to have them right in front of me.
There you
$49 million. I'm sorry, 49 million units of the Super Nintendo sold. This is worldwide. This is not just North America either, by the way. 49 million Super Nintendos sold worldwide. The Genesis sold 29 million. So still, that's a $20 million difference. That's very substantial.
20 million console.
20 million console difference.
Yes, worldwide. However, I believe the whole Mortal Kombat fiasco cost Nintendo a bit with its,
hardcore
blood-wanting North American audience.
Before there was the adjective of hardcore gamer, there was the duel between the Super Nintendo being the sweat in Mortal Kombat versus Mortal Kombat on the Genesis, which actually had blood when you hit somebody.
Right. So
which seems so ridiculous now, but at the time,
sadly, if you're too young to be alive to even remember such things, the tiny little pixelated blood on the Genesis made people flock to the stores and buy the Genesis version of Mortal Kombat over the Super Nintendo.
But you could also make the argument that the tiny blue pixels on the Super Nintendo that they refused to change to red cost Nintendo a substantial amount of market share.
However, they fixed that for Mortal Kombat 2.
That's true. Their lesson. They did, and for every Mortal Kombat subsequently as well. I remember when Mortal Kombat 3 too.
When Donkey Kong Country came out in, I believe, '94, that really kicked Nintendo into the lead for good.
Yeah, Rare really came to their rescue.
Whoa, this thing is like almost a full motion looking kind of Donkey Kong going on. That's amazing and helps sell units. So.
Right.
And the Super Nintendo wins.
So here you go. So 10 million TurboGrafx 16s, and Sega CD even managed 6 million consoles.
Which is crazy if you've ever played any games for it.
Oh, yeah.
Probably, yeah, they're bad.
They're pretty bad. They still suffer from the full motion video syndrome of the time.
Except for Sonic CD, which was good.
Oh no, it's not that we're not saying they were winners. I mean, there were still some good games.
But I mean, like Sewer Shark,
Night
Trap.
Night Trap is the infamous example of full motion video at its absolute worst.
I actually had a friend who had crisscrosses make my video.
Oh yeah,
that was ridiculously bad. Anyway.
The 32X. Which was not really a console, sold 200,000 copies.
Another Genesis
add-on.
That didn't go too well.
And the CDI managed 570,000.
Good for them.
Yep. So, hey, we outsold the 32X.
So
Super Nintendo wins. Now, let's use your criteria here. What innovation on the Super Nintendo?
Innovation, once again, kind of fuzzy. Not a lot of innovating, really. I mean, they had marginally better graphics and sound than the regular Nintendo did, but I mean, if you compare it to things like the CDI or the Neo Geo, not as good as those. So that's a bit of a wash. Price certainly helped it. I don't think it catapulted it into the front. In fact, some might argue that the Genesis, which sold for right around the same thing, about $200, was better in the price point, and that helped it because after some time, they were giving away Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 for free with their system. And that's what eventually got me to get one. I was like, oh man, here's some good games. It finally gave me the push to go out and spend my paper route money and get a Genesis as a second console.
Yeah, and I think the price point here, we don't want to make the point, as you've already said, we don't want to make the point that we're saying that the cheapest console wins.
No, but it helps.
Just that there's going to be a magical price point. This is not a $700 Neo Geo.
Right. Right. Exactly. It didn't. So price, I don't think really helped nor hindered the Super Nintendo greatly. I think it actually bumped the Genesis up in this generation. However, once again, the big difference here is the games that Nintendo had at Super Nintendo. Once again, when I say this is the golden age of console gaming, there were some really heavy hitters that came out for the Super Nintendo because they still had a stranglehold on those third parties.
Oh, yeah.
Like Square and Konami and all this other stuff. I mean, come on. Final Fantasy II, Final Fantasy III, or 4 and 6 if you're going by the Japanese numbering.
All the Castlevanias.
All the Castlevanias. Super Metroid. Earthbound.
Earthbound. Yeah. But no, I mean...
Donkey Kong Country.
Mega Man again.
Star Fox.
Donkey Kong Country. Because Donkey Kong makes a comeback for the Super Nintendo.
Chrono Trigger.
Oh, yeah.
Many considered.
There were some incredible games for... And now think
just Super Mario World.
But think about the great games for Genesis now. And there were some very good games for Genesis.
Yes, there were.
But think of the games that were out for Genesis that were very good that weren't also on Nintendo.
No, that's more of a problem.
Sonic
was really good. You had some good ones like Toe Jam and Earl.
Yeah,
there was some that weren't super blockbusters, but they were good enough in their own right,
Vector Man, which was always one of my favorites. Mm-hmm. There was Comic Zone, which I don't think came onto which I remember playing quite a bit of.
There were a few games that came out for multiple systems. This was a time when games would come out for multiple systems, but not be the same thing. And Genesis did take the cake in a few of those. Ghostbusters. By far, they had the best version of Ghostbusters of the old games. Mm-hmm. Also,
I remember
Tiny Toon Adventures even.
Sega doing an incredible job on sports games as well. They really made EA kind of come into its own with sports game publishing.
So, using the criteria, innovation's kind of a wash. Price slightly helps the Genesis, but games kicks the Super Nintendo into the lead here, and that's I think why you have a clear-cut winner here in the Super Nintendo. But this was a tough fight for this generation.
Sure, and I think this is what we consider the age for us, but I think we have to also say that we're putting to bed, when this console generation is in its twilight, the era of the two-dimensional game, which in some ways was tremendously good, but in some ways was tremendously bad, which is why we'll jump into the 3D realm next. The next generation of consoles, the 3D generation of consoles, if you will, the leap from 2 dimensions to 3-dimensional space, is in the 5th generation of consoles, folks. And as you can see, we're trading up our Final Fantasy III, or Final Fantasy VI, for Super Nintendo, for Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation.
I don't know if there is a game more just
indicative of one particular generation.
Thank you very much.
It is kind of the quintessential.
It makes the fanboys whiz themselves in glee.
Yes, including us.
Not so much, but
well, I don't know.
It was a good game.
I have a lot of fond memories of Final Fantasy VII, even if it wasn't the greatest game ever made.
No, sorry, it's not.
Okay, well, we can talk about that sometime. Sometime we'll have a nice podcast.
But anyway,
so the 5th generation of consoles. Here are the combatants. We've got the 3DO by Panasonic, also by Sanyo. Debuts in 1993. We've got the Atari Jaguar, also comes out in 1993. The Sega Saturn, which I really thought was going to be. I know the Saturn really, without the Sega CD, I have a feeling the Saturn probably would have been a much better competitor. And the Sony PlayStation, debuted in 1995. And last but not least, and it actually is last, is the Nintendo 64, which debuts in 1996. Early 1996, but it debuts. And, this is the era of 3D gaming. Now, the Saturn, for many, many reasons, I don't want to give you the idea that if the Sega CD were gone, the Saturn would have been the greatest thing in the universe, because the Saturn had a lot of problems. It had like 5 different processors on it, and you couldn't do simple 3-dimensional graphics without intense amounts of programming. And
it was
just a nightmare to program for.
Too. Yeah,
it was a big box. It was the precursor to the shape of the Xbox. It was very expensive.
Is this reminding anyone of anything now, folks?
Yeah, exactly. I know it. It's true, but I think that the Saturn had a lot of problems that would fit into our criteria, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Your theory of why games succeed and why they fail. The clear generational winner here is the PS1, the PlayStation. Mm-hmm. The PlayStation sells over 102 million consoles. That is up to June of this year. So that means that they have sold over, because they still sell PlayStation 1 consoles in retail.
Yeah. And it's ridiculous. That is some rarefied air to sell over 100 million consoles worldwide. I believe there's only 4 that have done that.
Oh, it's astronomical.
And that's PlayStation 2, the Game Boy series, and the Nintendo DS. Which is still going strong, ridiculously.
And in the case of the Game Boy and the DS, there were multiple iterations of the same console.
That's true.
Although you can argue there were 2 iterations of the PS1 as well.
It prints money. Ha ha ha.
So why was the PS1 the clear winner here? Well, I think looking over something, just looking down process of elimination, the 64 used cartridges.
Well, hold on.
Okay, go ahead.
The 64 sold how many?
The 64 sold 33 million.
Okay, so
less than a third.
Yeah, so once again, clear-cut winner for the Sony. Mm-hmm. Cartridges greatly hindered the 64.
Absolutely.
Even though the actual graphical processing of the 64 was better, in part because of the cartridges, and you didn't have the crazy long loading times, it didn't have the full motion movies. It didn't have the music.
It didn't have the pizzazz. Besides the massive amount of space that was needed for these things, which is one of the reasons why Square ended up inevitably leaving Nintendo.
One of the most talked about turnabouts in the history of video games is when Square left Nintendo.
Because there's a much bigger story to that. It's not just
because of the cartridge thing, although really there's no way they could have put Final Fantasy VII onto the 64.
No.
Unless it was greatly changed. But
unless they made Final Fantasy 6.5, which is what they would have had to have done.
I would have been fine with that.
Yeah,
but it was partly because Nintendo had treated their third parties badly for so long, because they were the big kid on the block, and they got this is also in that Game Over book, which you should all look at, by the way. But they got to be the big kid on block. They got too big for their britches, and they got bossy.
Right.
And they bossed around their third parties, especially Square.
Not even just bossy, but cocky.
Cocky, very cocky.
It's like, we are the standard. You conform to us. We don't conform to you.
Yeah, and pissed Square right off, and they said, "Hey, look, Sony's got a console. Let's go do that."
So the PS1. Let's talk about the innovation of the PS1. Why did it win in terms of innovation? I would argue that the seamless integration of CD, as well as the way that they went out and secured the way that they secured exclusive content, which really was, I think, different than the way that Nintendo had done exclusive content. Because remember, at this point, Nintendo still really has the rule that they want the highest quality games. No matter, they don't care if you release 10 of them. They'd rather have one really good one than they would 10 kind of mediocre ones. PlayStation comes in and says, "Hey, Square, we see that you're interested in making Final Fantasy, and that's fantastic. But maybe you want to try some of your other ideas that maybe aren't sure hits. Give them a shot on the PlayStation. It can work."
Yeah.
And there were a lot of games that weren't that great, but they came out exclusively for the PlayStation.
There were a lot of games that came out for the PlayStation. And in all that, you got some real gems. I think the innovation is the big thing here. The innovation of having a not ridiculously expensive system that played CDs, CD-ROMs, and integrated that very well.
That's right.